Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is the Indivisible Minnesota Town Hall with Jake Schwitzer, the Managing Outreach Director for Senator Tina Smith. My name is Jennifer O'Brien, and I'm one of the leaders of Edina Indivisible. This is the second statewide town hall with our senators. The first was in April with Outreach Director Rommel Lee from Senator Klobuchar's office. We're going to ask everybody to go on mute, please. We'll be following a similar format to the one in April with questions submitted by Indivisible chapter leaders from across the state. We will be keeping everyone in the audience on mute tonight, but feel free to post any questions in the chat and we'll try to work them in. We'll be discussing a broad range of topics, so hopefully we'll cover yours as well. I'd like to introduce the co-host group leaders for this event who will be asking the questions tonight. And team, if you can please wave when I call your names. I'm going to start with Kimberly Wilburn from Plymouth area Indivisible. Where are you, Kimberly? You
right
can
there.
mute yourself so we can see you. Kimberly.
Okay. If you're in gallery view, you can see me.
You have to pop up you eventually have to speak to pop up on the front. Okay, Rita Albrecht, who is from Indivisible Bemidji.
Hello, this is Rita in Bemidji. I see some of my Indivisible St. Paul buddies on the call. Thanks for your support during my campaign.
Denny Fitzpatrick from Arrowhead Indivisible.
Hi there, glad to be here.
Yay. He's got the best background. Lynn Dr. Pinnick from Indivisible Monaga Park Rapids.
Yep, Lynn Dr. Pinnick with Monaga Park Rapids Indivisible. Right up here in central Minnesota, right next
I'm
to
not
you.
gonna talk anyway.
For attendees, why don't you put yourselves on mute, please?
Can you put it on speaker?
And let's see, Kyle Harrell from
Kyle Harrell.
Harrell from Indivisible Morris.
Hi, everybody.
Lisa Urbes from Indivisible St. Paul.
Hi, Lisa Urbs.
Oh my gosh, I'm just butchering everybody's names. I'm
It's
so sorry.
okay. Everybody does it. It's not a problem.
Yuri Hong from Indivisible St. Peter Mankato.
Everyone, happy to be here.
Colleen Miner from Edina Indivisible.
Hello.
Sandra Larson from St. Croix Valley Indivisible.
Hi, all.
And Scott Ickes, the Senior Regional Organizer for Minnesota National Indivisible.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming. It's so great to see such a huge crowd. I'll be dropping a few things in the chat from time to time, so I'll be the busybody pasting links in there.
Speaker.
That's my job.
Okay, and I just want to say that if we have people who are not part of Indivisible but found out about this event, you can find an Indivisible chapter near you by going to indivisible.org, where you can type in your zip code and find an event or a group near you, and we hope that you will join us. Next, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Jake Schwitzer, who has a long history in DFL politics, including over 8 years with Senator Franken before joining Senator Smith in 2018 as the Managing Outreach Director. Hello, Jake.
Hi, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It's a great opportunity to be able to speak with all of you, and thank you for all of your work and activism. So my name is Jake Schwitzer. As Jennifer said, I've worked for the Senate seat for basically my career, almost 13 years now. I worked for Senator Franken from his first day in office, actually in the Washington office for a while, and then moved back to Minnesota, where I'm from, and have led outreach teams for Senator Franken and now Senator Smith through multiple election cycles with her. So it's a pleasure to be with you all today, and I'm happy to answer all your questions. You may see me got some of the questions ahead of time, so I could hopefully have some intelligent answers. You may see me looking down and reading notes from time to time. Those are the questions that I am less of a personal expert on, but having worked in this stuff for a while and have, obviously having a great working relationship with Senator Smith, feel comfortable talking about all kinds of things. So happy to talk with you all about anything under the sun tonight.
Okay, well, we're so glad you're here. We also want to say that many of us are fans of Senator Smith's work. She's definitely a progressive, so defending women's rights and supporting a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, supporting common sense gun violence prevention efforts, a strong social justice ally, embracing clean energy initiatives, and supporting overturning Citizens United, which maybe Mitch McConnell will be willing to do now. Thank you, Georgia. And she supports the For the People Act and more. And I think a lot of us, we all know each other because we did a number of text banks and phone banks for Senator Smith. And now we're very excited that there is a chance that she can push for a more meaningful change for issues that affect all of us. And we also want to thank her for supporting the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Act plan, which is the first step forward on things. And so we're grateful that you're here, and we can get started on questions. And the first question is going to be asked by Kimberly Wilburn from Plymouth Area Indivisible. Take it away, Kimberly.
All right. Okay. Our democracy continues to be under attack. There are those who want to make sure that some voices, particularly those of Black and Brown people, are not heard. As of March 24th, legislators have introduced 361 bills with restrictive provisions in 47 states. 5 restrictive bills have already been signed into law. These bills increase gerrymandering and voter suppression. These racist and anti-democratic moves are unacceptable. We need a strong federal response to ensure that all Americans can have their voices heard. We really appreciate Senator Smith's support for S1 DC statehood, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and especially getting rid of the archaic Jim Crow filibuster. These are all top priorities for Indivisible across the country. What is happening in the Senate right now in regards to democracy reform, and what role is Senator Smith playing in leading her cause on these vital bills, and how else can we help?
Yeah, great question. So I'll rewind to January and kind of this incredible new world we found ourselves in with a Biden administration, Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate, and a mountain of problems to address. So, Congress's first priority was getting the president's cabinet staffed up. So, the Senate had to confirm all those nominees, so they spent quite a bit of time doing that. Then the Senate moved to the American Rescue Plan, which is an almost $2 trillion bill that focused specifically on immediate COVID relief and things related to that. Although it was slightly broader than you would think, with a lot of economic programs like massive expansions of the child tax credit and other things that are going to have a huge impact on the economy this year, and we're really excited about. Now, after the Senate spent a couple more weeks on, the president's nominees, the Congress is currently on a recess or a state work period, so they're not in Washington. When we return to Washington, it'll be. I'm personally very interested in. Sorry, I'll try to talk closer to the microphone. I guess I'm muffled. I'm not entirely sure what will be the next major bill on the docket, but there are kind of several huge legislative pieces in the pipeline. You mentioned S1. You mentioned the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. There's a huge infrastructure proposal coming. there are several big pieces, and I'm not entirely sure what will be the first to come up. But you also mentioned the senator's support for ending the filibuster. All of those big things you mentioned won't happen unless we end the filibuster. It's pretty clear that Republicans will not give us 60 votes for anything. They're now complaining that Democrats and Biden have no interest in working on a bipartisan basis. All of the things we're talking about doing have supermajority supports in the country. These are bipartisan proposals. It's not our fault that Republicans in Congress aren't choosing to vote with supermajorities of the country. We feel, Senator Smith feels, she is acting in a bipartisan manner by supporting things that huge majorities of Minnesotans want her to support. I mean, that's just like a very easy thing of representative government to do. So step one, unfortunately, is ending the filibuster, and then we can get to a lot of those other issues you talked about, which will hopefully happen.
Okay. There's our next question is going to be about economic recovery and the climate. And the Thrive Act, there are 10 senators that have signed on to the Thrive agenda, including Senator Sanders, Markey, Warren, Schumer, Booker, Wyden, Udall, and Gillibrand. Gillibrand. In many ways, the Thrive agenda resembles the Clean Economy Act of 2020, which Senator Smith introduced last year. We would really love to see Senator Smith as a Thrive co-sponsor. And I'll introduce our next questioner who will be talking about this, and is Rita from Indivisible Bemidji.
Thank you, and thanks, Jake, for joining us tonight. I know that earlier this year, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan, which you mentioned, because we really needed that COVID relief. And I want to thank Senator Smith for her role in passing the American Rescue Plan, because it really delivered, as you know, billions of relief to Minnesotans and to the whole entire state. So now President Biden and Congress are focused on the recovery to build back better in our economy. And last week, President Biden released the Americans Jobs Plan. And the first part of this Build Back Better package, or infrastructure plan, is important. And the American Jobs Plan will address physical infrastructure and the care economy, as you know. We think it's a great core package, but we also think it doesn't go far enough. And we'd really like to see Senator Smith support a more transformative Senate version of the recovery package that is 3 times as big, a version that goes well beyond the pandemic and invests in and restores communities that have been devastated by multiple historic overlapping crises like mass unemployment, racial injustice, the public health crisis, and climate change. So an emerging Senate version of Biden's Build Back Better that was mentioned at the top of this question will go much further than Biden's plan, and that's called the Thrive Resolution. And we'd like to see Senator Smith sign on to this version. Will Senator Smith sign on to the Thrive Resolution so that we can deliver pandemic recovery bill that's bold and big, even if Joe Manchin can't, so big and so bold that Senator Manchin can't say no?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's the Joe Manchin show. Even if we do get rid of the filibuster. So I asked my colleagues in DC about this Thrive resolution and kind of what the path forward was for that. Now that there is this infrastructure proposal that the president has put forward. And it was their understanding that the resolution was kind of last year's way to talk about how we should do some of this stuff, and the attention has shifted to legislative efforts. So if there is a Thrive bill introduced in the Senate, we will certainly take a look at that. It sounds like there is a bill in the House that maybe we could look at for inspiration. I'll just make the first point of why Senator Smith is particularly excited about the path that this infrastructure bill is headed, is she has been pushing for this idea of a clean electricity standard for a while as a way to drive the needed investments in clean energy that we're going to, in clean electricity that we're going to need to solve the climate crisis. And that is kind of the centerpiece of the president's plan moving forward. So that is certainly something that the senator is going to be pushing as a must-have in any of these bills moving forward. It sounds like you're looking for a few more dollars involved. So we can, I mean, I think I can confidently say that Senator Smith would love to see more dollars in the plan. You know, I'd be interested to hear what all of your specific ideas of where that should go might be, but it's clear that after the American Rescue Plan, the immediate needs in the economy and COVID relief and vaccinations and all those things, there is a strong desire in Congress to still pass, bold, forward-looking stimulus packages that will, transform the economy moving forward. So I can take a look at if there are things in the Senate that end up being, the Thrive Act. We'll be happy to take a look at that, and we can look more into the Senate bill. But I think broadly speaking, our interests are aligned here.
I'm on mute. Okay. Can you talk just a little bit about the Clean Energy Act that she's putting forward? Just a little bit about that. It might segue into some of our other questions.
Yeah, this is where I get to be a little bit in over my head on a personal level. So the idea of a clean electricity standard is basically setting in statute a requirement that by a certain date, we would have all of our electricity would be net zero carbon, and so it doesn't pick sources or anything like that. It sets the carbon standard, and it sets a date that we have to get there. And so what that has been shown to do by researchers in this area is it drives the private investment that we will need in the energy market to get off of fossil fuels and to get to a net zero emission electricity economy. And then from there, we can do things like reforming transportation and other things, but without getting off of coal power and things like that. Having an electric car still isn't solving the problem. We need to address the electricity system first. And then the rest of these solutions can fill in under that. So that's our focus. And if you are interested in talking more about into the weeds of that, I can put you in touch with folks in our office who are far smarter on climate policy and energy policy than I am.
The next two questions are going to be addressing climate change issues that are very near and dear to Minnesotans. And I'm going to introduce Denny Fitzpatrick from Arrowhead Indivisible to talk about mining in the boundary waters.
Hey everybody, it's an honor to be here. Thank you to everybody. I'm Denny Fitzpatrick with Arrowhead Indivisible in Grand Marais up the beautiful North Shore. And since we are one of the primary gateways to the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, my question will be about mining and the Boundary Waters. First of all, Jake, we are so grateful and thankful and relieved to see Senator Smith's recent public support for federal protection for boundary waters with regard to copper nickel mining, the sulfide bearing ore mining. That was just an excellent letter that she sent to Secretaries Vilsack and Holland. It asked to reinstate that study considering a 20-year moratorium on the mining in that Rainy River watershed. Now, my question is this. Is Senator Smith also opposed to copper sulfide mining elsewhere on the Duluth complex, including the St. Louis River Valley. And let me explain. We know this copper sulfide bearing ore is not your father's iron ore mining. When the sulfide bearing ore is dug up and exposed to air, it releases its acid into the air and the water, which would just be a disaster for our environment, our economy, many aspects of our way of life here in Grand Marais and Grand Portage. We're terrified of the idea, frankly. You see, we all live downstream from it, and the watershed ends up here, the air shed ends up here. It's not allowed in most other states, and because of major disasters, it's been banned in some other countries. So Senator Smith's letter will help protect us from the Twin Metals proposed project in the Rainy River watershed. But we need the same kind of protection from the Polymet proposed project, which threatens Lake Superior, the water and the air of the Fond du Lac Band, and all the other downstream communities, not to mention our Anishinaabe Grand Portage Band members who are also opposed to copper nickel mining. Now, I've worked on the Superior National Forest for 25 years with the U.S. Forest Service. I've canoed many of the lakes. I've harvested wild rice in many of the rice lakes. So I have firsthand knowledge of the value and fragile, precious value. What we could really use is a prove it first law, prove it first to protect our clean water from copper nickel mining. It's never been done safely yet. If these multinational corporations could show us one mine that's operated safely for 10 years and been closed for 10 years safely, then we might have the science and transparency and proof that we would need to allow this type of mining. So until that point, I beg you to oppose sulfide bearing ore mining throughout the Iron Range of northeastern Minnesota to protect all of our watersheds downstream. So in summary, I'll end by repeating my question. Is Senator Smith also opposed to copper sulfide mining elsewhere on the Duluth complex, including the St. Louis River Valley? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Denny, and thank you for your work in the Superior National Forest. I actually have my mug here from the Chippewa National Forest. Not the same, so the letter you were referring to was about there was a study ongoing to study whether mining, particularly copper nickel mining, could be done safely in the Rainy River watershed. That study was ongoing. And from what we know, it was close to being finished. And then President Trump took power and they just weirdly canceled it. Maybe not that weirdly. And we're just moving forward without figuring out, what the answers to that study would be. And when we asked them, to release what had been done on the study, they redacted almost all of it. It was pretty fishy. So Senator Smith's position has been, and we are pushing the Biden administration to reinstate that study and to not move forward with any mining until that study is finished. It seems like it should be able to be finished pretty quickly if it was already almost done, and we need to follow what that science says. That is Senator Smith's position kind of writ large in mining, regardless of the type of mining. Mining should be done safely by the environment. It should meet rigorous environmental standards. And importantly, you mentioned the tribal nations affected. Senator Smith supports and recognizes the rights of tribal nations to be treated the exact same as states in terms of clean water and clean air regulations. Which are rights that are enshrined in federal law, and have only kind of been recognized or asserted in recent years. We feel she feels those are big ways for those nations in particular to have to pursue their rights and have their voice heard in this process, because they are by federal law on equal footing as states are. In direct answer to your question, Senator Smith has not ruled out copper nickel mining anywhere all over the place. What she is asking for is extremely rigorous environmental standards that they need to be met. I hadn't heard this idea of a prove it first law before. I can certainly take that to our DC staff and see what they have to think. If folks have other ways that we should be enshrining in environmental requirements that things have to meet, we're certainly open to those ideas. But that is her approach as it comes to mining writ large. Is in order to, they should have to prove that they can be able to do it safely. And when things like the Trump administration canceling the study happened, it makes us pretty suspicious that there was going to be some evidence coming out that they wouldn't be able to do it safely.
Thanks, Jake.
Sure.
So if people are following along in the chat, Greg Layton from Plymouth Area Indivisible has a link in there for more info on Prove It First, part of the DFL Environmental Caucus there. So people can, if want to take that and look at it later, that's there. So we're going to move on to our next one. And I'd like to introduce Lynn Dr. Pinnock from Indivisible Park Rapids to talk about Line 3 and climate action.
Thank you. And thank you, Jake, for being here. And thank you to Clara and to Kim for the Stop Line 3 banners that you have on your Zoom. I appreciate that. I'm a small business owner, a bed and breakfast owner on a small frail lake in north central Minnesota. Line 3 is already under construction in my neighborhood, and it's already destroyed thousands of trees and is endangering the small, very frail lake that I live on. In fact, the lake that I live on, environmental studies have indicated that my lake is probably the most vulnerable lake to Line 3. And by the way, Line 3 is not a replacement. They are not taking out the old line. This is a brand new corridor. This is over 330 miles of a brand new pipeline. It isn't like changing out the plumbing in your bathroom. It is a new pipeline. Although Enbridge has very cleverly sold it to a lot of people that we're just replacing this. This is a new, safer pipeline. Well, climate change is not only an existential threat, it's impacting Minnesotans like me, it's impacting our health, it's impacting our businesses, it's impacting our jobs, and it is so importantly impacting our valuable, beautiful natural resources like our forests, our rivers, our lakes. It is endangering the water. Yet permits continue to be granted to corporations like Enbridge, who is building this most expensive pipeline in their history at a huge cost to our climate, huge cost to our lakes, huge cost to the water, as I said. Our Monaga Park Rapids Indivisible is devoted to issues around environment and science. And we stand, in fact, we stand every Tuesday night with Honor the Earth and Indigenous people to protect the water. And we also, just a plug here, if anybody has free time, come stand with us every Tuesday night in front of Enbridge, because that's where we are. But we ask you to please consider this. Other pipelines have been stopped, but not Line 3. Line 3 goes against everything the Biden White House and the Democratic Party says needs to be done right now on climate change. I'm asking you, as someone who lives within a mile, I live within a mile of Line 3 that's already in the ground. I have to drive by every single time I go into Park Rapids. I have to drive by and see destruction of thousands of trees. Nothing will ever be planted over that area because they're just gone. That has to be cleared because if there's a leak. So I'm asking, what will Senator Smith do to stop Line 3?
Yeah, so I put this question to our again, you probably saw me reading notes over the past couple of questions because I'm not incredibly smart on environmental law, so I asked our DC staff for their input. And so I'm just gonna read exactly what I was given here. as we talked about with the clean electricity standard, the senator is very focused on reducing emissions, kind of globally across the energy sector, and that includes reducing and eliminating demand for oil and other fossil fuels, and complete mitigation of greenhouse gas and other emissions from fossil fuels that remain in use. That said, in this case, there's very little role for her to weigh in on particular permitting processes in an appropriate way, such as line 3, except to make sure that state and tribal officials and regular citizens and tribal members are being heard. She takes her responsibility to raise up the voices from Minnesota's tribal governments in the federal permitting process extremely seriously and advocates for all who live in Minnesota. As you said, this project is already under construction. It has met these permits. In talking to our staff in DC, we're focused on the policies that inform that permitting process. If there's input, if there are things that we should be doing on a legislative, on a policy level to strengthen those processes, to make them stricter, harder to meet, things like that, I think that's the type of thing that Senator Smith is looking for. But beyond that, and I also want to make the point, I'm not trying to punt to some unnamed staffer in DC. For anyone who would like to follow up with other folks in the office, if I don't have the answer you're looking for, I'm happy to connect you with people who can speak far more intelligently than I can on the ins and outs of pieces of law that I'm not an expert on. Some of these folks have my email from helping set up this meeting, and we can get that distributed, and I can connect folks with other people in our office if there's more follow-up people would like to be doing, if that makes sense.
Appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah, I would appreciate that greatly. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
A lot of people have questions about line 3, but we want to keep moving, and maybe we'll get back to it at the end.
Sure.
But I'd like to introduce Kyle Harrelf from Indivisible Morris. Did I get that right, Kyle?
You got it. That's right. I'm Kyle. So my question for you, Jake, is about workers' rights.
Mm-hmm.
So in February 2020, Senator Smith introduced a bill to prohibit states from passing so-called right-to-work laws that make it harder for workers to form unions, fight for higher wages, and push for better working conditions. Recently, the House passed the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which is quite similar to Senator Smith's bill. And so the basic question is, will Senator Smith lead on getting this passed in the Senate, and what would that look like? And the other part of this is inquiring about the $15 minimum wage, because that's been recently stripped from the COVID recovery bill.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of both of those pieces.
Yeah, so on both of those, Senator Smith feels strongly. The PRO Act that you mentioned that the House passed, absolutely, Senator Smith is going to be taking a leading role on getting that passed in the Senate. She serves on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee in the Senate, which has jurisdiction over labor unions and the right to organize. She's strongly supportive of the right to organize and increasing union membership. She'll be doing anything she can to get that bill passed. That is a top priority. Unfortunately, similar to the $15 minimum wage, which she is also, strongly supportive of, those will both require, at minimum, getting 50 votes, or 50 votes plus one, plus the vice president breaking a tie. So the minimum wage was stripped out because there were not 50 votes at that time dealing with the American Rescue Plan. We certainly hope that if that comes back around, as a standalone issue, that is something that could be done. But again, that's assuming that we can get 50 votes to do away with the filibuster. So unfortunately, there's an incredible amount of policy change hanging on that one question of whether or not we can do away with the filibuster. And once we do, things like a $15 minimum wage, things like the PRO Act, guaranteeing the right to organize, doing away with right to work laws, punishing bad actors who are unfairly putting their fingers on the scale against union elections, all of those things will flow very quickly after that, which is great. So to answer your question, the first step is Senator Smith is using her voice to try and convince her colleagues to do away with the filibuster, and then following up on all of the, the excellent policy we could pass once that happens.
Thanks, Jake.
Rose, let's see. Our next one is about racial equity and opportunity, and Lisa from Indivisible St. Paul will be asking this question. Their group has been working a lot on this.
Hi, Jake.
Hi.
So most of our local Indivisible groups are working on racial equity initiatives. At Indivisible St. Paul, we do a weekly action hour where we work on calls to action, both at the federal and the state and the local level. And we really, really try to have something in each one of those call to actions that deals with racial equity. And we really want to see some progress on this year. One of the things that I find interesting is here in Minnesota that, the disparity issue is huge, and it's almost embarrassing. So,
almost. It is embarrassing.
Okay, I was trying to be nice, but anyway. So basically the question is, how is Senator Smith working on ways to invest in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities in Minnesota? And how is she going to help build the economic, educational, and representative parity that they've been denied for so long?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And to take that representative parity question first, the biggest thing that we can do there is passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and doing away with these racist attacks on Black and Brown people using their voice in elections, as well as reforming, gerrymandering and all of the different ways that white power is used to defend its position, basically. So I asked our policy team to put together, in response to this question, to put together a list of policies that Senator Smith is working on in a racial equity angle. We focus primarily on an economic angle, but can certainly broaden out past that if you'd like. So I'm just going to kind of move extremely quickly through this because it's a long list. First off, in housing, Senator Smith is taking over as the chair of the Housing Subcommittee and the Banking Committee in the Senate, which is super exciting, and addressing the affordable housing shortage in Minnesota is a top priority, and is a huge issue of that of the racial disparities that you mentioned in Minnesota, because of the barriers that issue has presented to passing on generational wealth. So that's going to be a top priority for her in the committee. She introduced the Public Housing Fire Safety Act to provide money for public housing agencies to install fire sprinkler systems after the terrible fire at the Cedar Riverside complex 2 years ago. I'm not going to read all of these. I'm going to skip over some of them. She fought the Trump administration's proposed revision to the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, which is an extremely in the weeds thing, but happy to get into that if anybody's interested. Talking about our Indigenous communities, she fought to put tribal governments on parity with state governments throughout all of these massive financial bills that we've been passing. And that resulted in the American Rescue Plan being the largest infusion of dollars into tribal governments in the history of our nation, which is super important. She is co-sponsoring legislation that led to the expansion of the child tax credit, and she will be pushing for that to be made permanent, which is an incredible poverty reduction tool moving forward, as well as expanding the earned income tax credit. She is fighting for legislation again in the housing space to expand and improve the low-income housing tax credit, which is one of the key sources of affordable housing development since Reagan moved us on from public housing. She is fighting to raise the minimum wage, provide paid family leave, paid sick leave for workers, all of which benefit workers of color at a disproportionate rate. She is co-sponsoring legislation to crack down on wage theft. Let's see, she has co-sponsored the Paycheck Fairness Act. There's a lot of stuff on banking, which is very in the weeds, so I'm just going to kind of skip over that. In education, she has sponsored the Addressing Teacher Shortages Act, which is aimed at increasing racial diversity in the teaching workforce, because students of color deserve to see teachers of color that look like them. She is fighting for improved access to workforce education for underserved youth, which is the 21st Century Workforce Partnerships and Youth Workforce Readiness Act. She's cracking down on abusive for-profit higher education. In the healthcare space, she is working to protect the Affordable Care Act and the expansions of the Medicaid program, which again disproportionately benefit people of color. And in energy and environment policy moving forward, particularly in this infrastructure bill, she is fighting for funding for energy efficiency and resiliency projects with a specific focus on environmental justice. So communities, often communities of color, low-income communities, have been taken advantage of by polluting industries, and they deserve to be compensated isn't the right word, but focused on in these efforts in an infrastructure bill moving forward. Those are some of the highlights, but happy to talk a lot more. Senator Smith, that list was originally put together because, frankly, after George Floyd's murder last year, Senator Smith came to us as a staff and said, "What are we doing to address racial equity in Minnesota?" And putting together that list was our proving to her what we as an office are doing, and we have continued to build on that year after year. And addressing racial equity will be a top priority, if not the top priority, of our office in this 6-year term.
Wow, well, that's quite a list.
It'll get
Well, thank you.
Okay. Well, that kind of segues into the question that Yuri Hung from Indivisible St. Peter Mankato is going to talk about with police accountability. You're up, Yuri.
So now that the Derek Chauvin trial is underway, the eyes of the world are once again watching Minnesota and how our courts and our states handle racial justice and inequity. The death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many other Americans of color in 2020 was yet another tipping point for our nation, as you know, and our state, to push for meaningful change and justice reform. What is Senator Smith working on now to finally make true progress in racial justice, especially with regard to police accountability and reform? I know that there was a long list of racial justice stuff that you just went through, but I was wondering if you could speak specifically to this aspect.
Yeah, happy to. So I'm going to talk about two pieces here, a bill that she is co-sponsoring and supporting, and a bill that she has introduced and is leading on her own. The first bill is kind of the broadest piece on police reform in the Congress. In the Senate last year, it was the Justice and Policing Act. This year, it was reintroduced in the House and passed as the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And it's a pretty big bill. It does a lot of things. Primarily, it makes it easier to hold police accountable in the courts by changing a legal standard of prosecuting police misconduct from a willfulness standard to a recklessness standard, which is really in the weeds lawyer stuff. So I'm not going to talk any more about it, but it's important. It reforms qualified immunity. It bans chokeholds and other how is it? Bans chokeholds and carotid holds is the term, which have been used to to kill people by police. It bans no-knock warrants in drug cases. It limits the transfer of military-grade equipment to state and local law enforcement. It requires the use of body cameras. It does quite a bit, but those are the highlights of the bill, and that's a super important piece of legislation that the senator's supporting and will be pushing for. The other piece the senator herself introduced, again, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, is the Supporting Innovation in Public Safety Act, and so this is aimed at funding and incentivizing state, local, and tribal governments who want to pursue innovative alternatives to policing, essentially. This could be, developing and implementing new models of mental health crisis response. This could be reassigning some law enforcement functions out of a law enforcement body, such as traffic enforcement, to unarmed public safety employees. It could be projects specifically aimed at reducing violence, harassment, and civil rights violations by law enforcement. It includes projects that would reduce police departments' financial reliance on offender-related justice models. So, getting money from the people that you are arresting. And it specifically recommends reforms to state and local criminal codes to eliminate unnecessary fines or fees and misdemeanor offenses that contribute to violent and racist policing. So this is basically the senator being frustrated with the fact that many of these abuses take place at local jurisdictions. The Minneapolis Police Department is not the United States Federal Police Department, right? But we can incentivize, we can use national expertise to fund communities that are doing innovative things here to cut down on police abuses. Senator Smith's bill in and of itself would not be enough. It's very much intended as a complement to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, but we feel if both were passed, it would make a huge difference in ending police or limiting police misconduct moving forward.
What are the chances of them being passed?
Step one, end the filibuster, and then pretty good, I think. I don't know. Ask Joe Manchin, I guess, but this is such an odd place to be in as a Senate office, having worked in the Senate for so long under Mitch McConnell, where terrible things would be piling up and awful things would be happening in the country, and our response was, okay, we can introduce bills that aren't going to go anywhere. Well, now we have a massive backlog of policy ideas and pieces of legislation that we're waiting, over 8-10 years that have been building up that we'd like to get moving. And so the question is, what do we do first? And then what's next, and what's next, and what's next? And we've got to shove it all into this 2-year period where we're guaranteed a trifecta of democratic power. We got to end the filibuster.
And how can we help make that happen?
Oh man, that's a good question. You are all a part of a nationwide network, right? I think I just saw in the news that Senator Klobuchar also supports ending the filibuster. So, boxes checked for both of your representatives here in the state. So focus your efforts on the national organization and getting to 50 Democrats in the Senate to get there. I am, as a federal employee, I'm limited in how I can advise you on advocating, but I think you have a pretty good idea of who needs to be talked to and who in their states can talk to them.
Okay.
Okay.
Colleen, that's kind of a good segue for you.
Yeah, I am up. Jake, I'm the one who's been emailing you. Are the kids in bed is what I want to know.
They are, and I turned off both sleeping monitors, so I can't even hear them if they're crying. So I'm just going to assume they're not. I'm not a terrible dad. My wife's downstairs. She can handle it.
Oh, good. Oh, good. We had a discussion about how late we should go. Anyway, you know, many of the indivisible chapters across the state, and you see there's a wide variety of us, work to re-elect Senator Smith. And we did it with all the tools in our toolkit in a pandemic, you know, the postcards, the sign distribution, the text banks, the phone banks, because we know that Senator Smith's work aligns with our values. And as someone who's been working in our office, Jake, what is the view of Indivisible, and where do groups like us fit into the new political landscape?
Yeah, I mean, so I think back to my time in the Senator Franken office when Indivisible first kind of became a thing, and you all as a group did a very good job of, you know, relentlessly coming into our office and telling us what things you wanted us to be working on, and that's kind of what you can do, right? And so our view of Indivisible and other groups like you is that you are a very organized group of passionate advocates who are, you know, going to make yourselves heard, which is exactly what you should be doing. And so, you know, I can't speak to the campaign side of things because of legal restrictions, although, you know, I enjoy having my job, so thank you for working for her reelection. But now Senator Smith finally has a 6-year term. So, you know, she was put into office, appointed, and had to run 8 months later, and then had to run again, and because that first election was a special election. So then she had to run again 2 years later. Now she finally has a full 6-year Senate term, so we can settle into you know, a real serious policy focus without the distractions of an election campaign. And you're all already there as a group, speaking your mind and telling us what you want Senator Smith to be working on, which is all we can ask for from an advocacy group. So I guess keep it up.
When will you be back in your offices? Anytime?
Yeah, it's a good question. We don't have a date certain yet. I think the vaccination situation is improving maybe faster than we as an office were anticipating. So that question is moving faster than we were thinking. We're going to be pretty conservative about our decision making around that, just because we both have to take into account the comfort levels of all of the staff in our office, as well as recognizing that meetings that we as an office are holding in person, you know, because of the power of being a United States Senator's office, might draw someone there who otherwise wouldn't be comfortable exposing themselves to a health risk, and we don't want to put anyone in that position. So we have to balance that with our obvious desire to be as accessible of an office to the public as we possibly can. So those are pulling in opposite directions. That being said, I think we are still being pulled in a more conservative direction of you know, not opening the office tomorrow, basically. But you know, we follow things like the governor's guidance. You know, we're monitoring variants and all this stuff, right? Because we don't ever want to be responsible for Senator Smith's office, you know, being an outbreak. That would be terrible. So those are kind of all of the considerations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So speaking of staying in touch, our last question is going to be coming from Sandra Larson with St. Croix Valley Indivisible. If we've got time, we'll post some questions from the chat. But Sandra, why don't you go ahead? We've got about 3 minutes.
I'll try to be quick. Jake, thank you so much for your insight. You've opened the door for us and expanded our view of Senator Smith's positions and so many things that we care about. Of course, indivisible groups would like to keep that door open a little bit. We'd like to continue this conversation. So my question to you is, how do we do that? What kinds of relationships, collaboration, opportunities to advocate together in a mutual way do you see the senator having with indivisible groups? And should we try to develop some kind of open communication channel, or maybe we should have occasional meetings, you know, like this one, or other working groups that we could get involved with? What do you think?
Yeah, so we have to be careful, and we're limited by Senate ethics rules about establishing like specific working groups and things like that. But you know, in this case, like you all are a very organized group. We don't need to organize a group. You know, in terms of establishing an open line of communication, I mean, that's what me and my team are there for. We are that open line of communication. So I manage a team of 12 folks all over the state of outreach staff. And we are a combination of regional staff. So we have 4 regional staff, and we have issue-focused staff. So we have a healthcare outreach director, we have an education and business outreach director, energy and environment and agriculture outreach director. So those are folks who are smarter than I am on the issues that they work on. And then we have community-based outreach directors. So we have, I think we are unique in Senate offices in that we have a Native American outreach director. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion outreach director who works in communities of color. And we have a veterans outreach director. Our job is to hear from you all and be talking with Minnesotans. So you can email me. I think someone posted my email in the chat. If I'm not the right person for you to talk to, I'll get you to the person who is. We can set up meetings, you know, where there are, you know, newsy things you want to be discussing. You can just email me if there's something going on in the Senate that you want the senator to know your opinion on. You can call our office. You can fill out the form on our website, although, you know, we get tens of thousands of form fill outs every month, so that's not necessarily the best way. You know, lots of different ways. We can talk about making it work in the senator's schedule to get her in a meeting like this as well. You know, when the world is back to normal, whenever that is, we could talk about doing it in in-person meeting. I think we try to be as accessible as an office as we possibly can. 12 people in an office to 5 million Minnesotans means we don't have a ton of time, but we do our best. I guess I would leave it at that. Email me, call me, email my colleagues, and then I'd be happy to do another one of these if there are more things or other things in the future you'd like to talk about.
Thank
you. Careful for what you wish for.
I remember again back to when President Trump was first elected, and I was working in Senator Franken's office. There was a local group of Indivisible St. Paul who would come stand outside our office on the street protesting every week, and then come inside for a meeting every week. And I was usually the one meeting with you. So I am used to persistent advocates, and you should be persistent. That's your job.
Well, that's great to hear. And is there any preference about, it sounds like emails are probably the easiest way to get a hold of people, or what about postcards, calling? Is there anything that's more effective than anything else? Faxing?
Don't fax. I mean, we get postcards. We get like big, batches of, thousands of postcards that, that are a petition or something like that. That's kind of, don't expect us to respond to 5,000 postcards. So if you want a response, email for sure. And just be patient because it might take a while for us to get to you, especially if all 90 of the people who are on this tonight are emailing me. I mean, calling our office is a little bit more difficult now because we're not in the office. So you are getting, one of our staff assistants who's at home, and it's a little bit harder for them to, try to transfer a call to one of us. So email for now, I guess, is the best.
Okay, that's great, because we have been sharing a link tree with emails to the office, and then also your email as well. So
Great.
I'm sure you'll be flooded because there are a number of topics related to line 3, the Endangered Species Act, education in Minnesota,
Mhm.
that we haven't been able to get to tonight, and we're running over on time. So I'm sure people will be in touch with you, but we wanted to make sure that to say thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we hope that you'll let the senator know that we're so grateful for her and the work that she does, and we want to support her in the fight for our democracy and on behalf of people who are struggling right now. Time is running out to move on as so many vital issues, but we would really love to see her sign as a co-sponsor to the Thrive Revolution. Revolution, that'd be something. Resolution. And we look forward to supporting bold vision and action from the senator. And
Great.
again, for everybody here, if in the chat, we've got our Linktree link in there, and we'll follow up with an email as well. So I just wanted to say thank you to all the Indivisible chapter leaders who have been co-hosting this event. It's great to see your faces after only being on Facebook and on emails. So that's terrific. And Jake, again, thank you so much for your time. It's very much appreciated, and let Senator Smith know that we're watching her work and we love a lot of it, and we're going to keep pushing.
Great. Thank you all. Thanks for joining. This was great. And thank you for your work.
Have a great night. Thank you, everybody.